The Dallas Cowboys have franchised Dalton Schultz. What does that mean for the rest of their offseason moves? All that and more on this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked on Cowboys. Locked on Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We want to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. I am Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. And today, of course, I am joined by Landon McCool. Check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. Landon, let's start with this. The Cowboys have officially franchise tagged Dalton Schultz. Your thoughts?
It's the end of the Dallas Cowboys. They should just turn in their franchise rights and just walk away from the team.
Well, the bad thing is a lot of people think you're being serious right now.
I mean, I'm clearly outwardly mocking these people because this is, and honestly, like, I really don't understand. Like, everyone's in hyper react mode now. Like, everyone's just upset about just everything the Cowboys do. It's like every guy the Cowboys sign is terrible. Every guy they didn't sign is their sister's boyfriends.
Yeah, let's start with this. The Cowboys announced today that they re-signed Noah Brown to a one-year deal. And I legitimately saw Cowboy writers and beat people like being upset about the deal. I'm like, listen, guys, there's a million things to get upset with the Cowboys about. Trust me, like legitimately so. That's not one, right?
And if anything, all it does is that it just shows you, like, how unuseful your opinion is. If you just get upset about every single thing, then you're probably going to be wrong about it. I just think that there's some nuance in all of this. There's plenty to be mad about. I mean, certainly we've come in here and talked about things to be mad about, but like, I don't know, man. Like, yeah. I mean, there's still more to talk about along those lines, but the idea of paying a young, talented tight end, not a ton of money to play tight end for you. And frankly, again, this probably isn't going to even be the number that he's playing on this year if they're able to get a long-term deal signed with him. So I just, I don't know. Like, I think that there's a level of just freak out and finality about what's going on when we still have not even seen what is about to unfold. We still don't have any idea of exactly what is going on.
Yeah. So the Cowboys did announce that Schultz is on the franchise tag. And this is what I tweeted as soon as it happened. I think by itself, Schultz getting, 1 year, $10.9 million isn't the worst thing in the world, right? Like, is it maybe a little bit of an overpay? I think we can have a discussion, right? I think he's probably worth more like the $7 to $8 million a year, like the Tyler Higbees of the world. I think you think he's a little bit better than that. And that's why I think you're okay with basically the 1 year, $11 million deal. The problem that I think a lot of Cowboy fans are having right now is that when you pair that move with releasing Amari Cooper and or DeMarcus Lawrence, that's where they have an issue, right? Like, releasing Cooper to pay Schultz is not something that people are all that happy about.
Yeah, and I guess my point is that I don't understand why they're pairing those things together. I mean, I mean, everyone's presenting it and phrasing it like the Cowboys went into the conversations like, you know what, we got to cut Cooper to franchise tag Schultz. I have an extremely hard time believing that. Like, I don't know why people are phrasing it that way. Those are just separate parts of the roster that have to be built. Like, I mean, I think they wanted Schultz. I think they wanted Schultz with Cooper if Cooper would take the pay cut. They wanted Schultz if Cooper didn't want to take the pay cut, and they cut him. So I think that and that's part of my issue is that a lot of this stuff is being too closely associated as being hand in hand when, obviously the cap is all related to each other because you're trying to fit all these players underneath the cap, but not all decisions are like directly handshake related to other decisions that you don't like,
I think there's also another thing going on here. I think there's only, as of this recording, it's just 1:00 p.m. Eastern time on Tuesday. There's only been 3 franchise tags given out so far. all three are tight ends: David Njoku, Mike Gesicki, and Dalton Schultz. I think the NFL is having a hard time valuing what do we do with these tight ends that probably aren't top 6 or 7 tight ends, but are probably top 15 tight ends. How much do we pay those guys? And I kind of think the rest of the league is trying to figure out what to do with them. And the Cowboys did this as a placeholder. We'll see what the long-term deal is, because I would be shocked, Landon, if he doesn't get a long-term deal. I don't think the Cowboys want to carry an $11 million hit on their cap this year.
No, I think they just want to retain Dalton Schultz. And again, like, look at the tight end is not wide receiver. And people need to stop pretending like it is. And in fact, frankly, I think people are reacting exactly opposite to the way these markets are. The league is filled with wide receivers of all different talents levels, of all different, sizes and shapes that can do all kinds of different things. There are many different ways to assemble a wide receiver core. There is not a ton of talented tight ends in this league. There are 2 or 3 elite tight ends.
Sure.
And then there's a class of tight end underneath that, probably of maybe 10 to 11 players that are solid to above average tight ends. And outside of that, there isn't any really tight end talent in this league. So if you play with a tight end, you need one. You have to kind of go through a lot to get one, because you can't just draft one and have one play that next year. That's just not really how the position works, unlike wide receiver and some of these other spots.
I think the problem that a lot of Cowboy fans are having with this deal, including myself, is if Dalton Schultz is getting $11 million for this year, how much better is he than pick your tight end? Kyle Rudolph, who might get $2 million in free agency. OJ Howard, who might get $4 million in free agency. Wouldn't they be better off going that route and investing more in the receivers, or keeping Amari Cooper, than doing that? What do you think?
I don't, because Kyle Rudolph is a rental, an older rental who's less talented than Dalton Schultz. So that's not comparable.
But those are just examples, like that tier of tight end.
But I mean, I guess my point is that when we have those same discussions with other positions, we completely poo-poo that. The idea of going cheap at tight end when it's a position that the Cowboys clearly have plans for and use a lot is not a good one, in my opinion. Like there's no money in any tight ends that is going to be playing this year.
So the issue comes down to a lot of people, again, including myself, believe that Schultz's production was a lot based off due to all of the other talent around him. If you take away some of that talent and you give that money to Schultz, will he still be as productive? Will, with more attention and more coverage, is he still somebody who can produce? I don't know that answer. We just haven't really seen him be a focal point of the offense yet.
I mean, to some degree, this. I guess the cognitive dissonance I'm having is, why aren't we having these similar conversations with Cooper as well? Because despite, I understand that Amari Cooper is the one that stirs the drink, or that's the perceived notion there. But Cooper also benefited from having CeeDee Lamb on the field. Sure. Cooper also benefited from having multiple wide receivers and multiple people that are
I just don't know if Schultz is somebody that he benefited from, right?
But the larger point is that you're benefiting from the other players in your team. Everybody gets that benefit. Why is that being held only against Schultz? Is my question. I understand that he's not the attention drawer that Cooper is, or the attention drawer that CeeDee Lamb is, and that's why there's degrees of this. But he's also being paid, and again, he's not necessarily going to be paid $10 million. He's probably going to be paid less than that once the deal is done. This is just a placeholder situation, So that's why I continue not to be upset about this, is because there's still more to learn here. Like there's still, this isn't the final deal.
All right. So what if they do come to a contract extension and the average for the year comes out to be $12 million a year over 4 years? Are you still good with that? Like, if that's the final number here?
I mean, I think it's more money than I feel comfortable paying, but at the same time, you don't have a solution at tight end. Yeah. Like, the idea that you've got all these options at tight end. Like, I just don't. The tight end is one of the one spot that is actually going to be hard to find replacements for the guys you want. You may not like the replacements that are coming for DeMarcus Lawrence if he gets cut. You may not like the replacements, especially immediately, that you're going to get for Cooper if he gets cut. But they're really aren't too many replacements for what you want with Schultz or what you want at the tight end position that are comparable. At least certainly not as many options. And I think there's a reason that, I mean, we saw reports upwards of 10 teams were interested in signing Schultz to a long-term deal.
Yeah.
And that, like you said, all the teams that have franchise tag their players yet, and I'm sure a couple wide receivers are going to follow right behind them.
Eventually,
but so far, it's all been tight ends. And I as much as everyone wants to get up in arms about how they think the Cowboys are destroying the team and all this stuff, look at what the interest was around the league. Like that kind of tells you what the inside information is there. If Schultz was so not worth $10 million, why were there 10 teams lining up to pay him more than $10 million in free agency?
I mean, I think part of it is there's a couple teams that have a ton of cap space, right? Like the Chargers, and they just don't have a tight end. But it's a fair point, right? I think at least Schultz, he hits a lot of the things that you want if you're going to spend on a tight end in free agency. He's young. He's at least an adequate blocker. We can debate his blocking skills, but at least adequate. He's an adequate receiver, and he's healthy, right? So if you have all those, you typically do get paid. So I understand the point.
One more thing too, real quick.
Yeah.
The whole market is screwed up by this whole change in the way the salary cap is being run, right? Because there are basically teams that go all the way up to the cap every year, and then they push money down the road. And then there are teams that are basically collecting cap space, right? They have tons and tons and tons of money in their reserve. So what does that do? It completely whacks the market completely out of any kind of recognizable.
A good example is the Patriots last year, right? They had so much cap space. So they ended up paying Hunter Henry $12.5 million a year, and then Jonnu Smith $12.5 million a year. And Dalton Schultz is probably looking at it like, I've got more receiving yards and touchdowns than either of those guys, and I'm younger, and I've been far more durable. So
So my point being is that just because some guy on Twitter says he's not worth $10 million, I mean, look at the market. Look at what's happening around the league. It's hard for you to say that while doing any kind of research on what the contracts that are being handed out and how wildly all over the place they are, and just sit here and tell me that he's not worth $10 million. Like, I mean, come on. Like, that's just it's the downside to paying money in free agency. If you're going into undrafted free agency, this is what you have to look forward to.
I'll just say one last thing on the Dalton Schultz, Michael Gallup thing. I've been saying it the last couple of days. I just didn't want this team to come back in 2022, paying Dalton Schultz, paying Michael Gallup, and losing Amari Cooper. And all of a sudden you're paying more for your weapons than you did last year, but you're losing Cooper and expect this to be an upgrade because it's just not going to be, right? But
I think that's totally fair. I think it's also fair to say that bringing Cooper back and everyone too, and expecting that to be better as well is also foolhardy. You know what I'm saying? Like the idea of just rolling it all back and that it would be better than it was last year is like, and assuming that it would be better than last year.
That's why if anything, I was just wanting them to completely rebuild the offense.
That's fair.
I'm fine with Schultz, but like if it's Schultz, and same thing I've been saying the last couple of days, Schultz, Lamb, and a rookie, that gets me significantly more excited than Schultz, Lamb, Gallup at $25 million a year, right? But we'll see. We'll
don't disagree. I think that right now they're trying to straddle both of those two ideas when they should be leaning into, hey, let's just completely retool this offense.
Yes, I agree. All right, let's take one quick break to tell you guys about BetOnline. Football might be over this season, but basketball is in full steam for both pro and college hoops. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance props to where the next fired coach is going to land, BetOnline.net is the #1 spot for all of your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spots for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC odds, right to the Olympic coverage and information. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and actions. BetOnline, where the game starts. As I was doing that live read, I just wanted to remind everybody that we were right about Calvin Ridley and DJ Moore. Just DJ Moore was a better pick.
Wow. Man, all you had to do is wait all this time. And then
all you had to do is wait
your redemption.
Sorry, that's a bad joke. All right, a couple other Cowboys-related things that we should get to. First and foremost, they announced that they have restructured the contracts of Dak Prescott and Zach Martin, saving the team $23 million. Not surprising, right? Because the Dak contract, the Dak contract was built to have this restructure in mind after year one. Mm-hmm. Zach Martin is a prime candidate to get restructured because I think they plan on having him for a long time. It'll be interesting to see if they restructure anybody else, but just general thoughts on them opening up $23 million here.
I mean, it's just procedural, really. They knew that they were doing it. We knew that they were doing it. They did it. Yeah, it's not really surprising. It's just it's what they're doing to kind of help pay their way here.
Yeah, you have to do these kind of moves when you're paying Dalton Schultz top 5 money, right?
I mean, for the next 2 months before he signs his new deal, yeah, absolutely.
I'm just joking. All right, some other news. A couple different people, including Todd Archer and Clarence Hill, reported that the Cowboys would like Cedrick Wilson back, but they believe they're gonna be priced out of that market. I know Cowboy fans are upset about this because they really like Cedrick Wilson as a third receiver. However, this is the type of move that I actually agree with him with. Don't pay Cedrick Wilson $8 to $9 million a year when you really only ever want him to be your third or fourth receiver, right? Like if they lose him, I'm not going to be all that upset. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you guys want to pay Cedrick Wilson $9 million, but you don't want to pay Dalton Schultz $10 million. Like, what are we doing here? Like,
Well, I don't know if Cowboy fans know that he's going to get paid that much. I think Cowboy fans were hoping to get him at like $4 or $5 million a year. I think the Cowboys were hoping to get him less than that. But
and that's the problem, right? Is that ultimately, like, we all want him for the price that we have in our minds. Like, we're not cap experts or contract experts. And the ones who are telling you, hey, guess what? Michael Gallup is not going into a 1 year, $6 million. I'm still seeing that. Like, we all guessed that, but I mean, you have to be open to be wrong about the idea that, like, because a guy tore an ACL that he's going to take a 1 year, $5 million deal. And the same thing goes with Cedrick Wilson. We shouldn't just assume because, he was our fourth receiver, he would be glad to come back and be our third receiver for only $4 or $5 million.
Well, compare that to another deal that happened today. The Lions signed Josh Reynolds to a 2-year deal worth $12 million, so $6 million a year. He had 300 yards last year, and Cedrick Wilson doubled that and can play on special teams, and he could be your punt returner. I mean, you just never, ever were going to get him at $4 million a year, right?
I mean, maybe you could if you hadn't signed that Zeke contract. Wait, no, that didn't have anything to do with it.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you just you evaluate the player, you assume that you have a good evaluation of it, and again, like I just think that the market is not as predictable as it was a couple of years ago because of the wide differences in how much cap space these teams have from top to bottom. It's thrown the market completely out of the loop.
I also want to let people know a little bit about Cedrick Wilson. Like, didn't play in 2018 because of an injury. 2019, he had 46 receiving yards during the whole season. 2020, he had 189 receiving yards. So the first 3 years of his career, you were looking at somebody that had 235 total yards. Like I vividly remember us talking about this during the preseason. Like, hey, are the Cowboys going to cut Cedrick Wilson before the 53-man roster cut down because they could save $2 million here? Like, is there that big of a difference between Noah Brown and Cedrick Wilson? Maybe not. They held on to Wilson, and he, to his credit, had a nice year in year 4.
Yeah.
But you're talking about a wide receiver 4 that didn't break out until this year. I'm okay letting this player walk, recouping a 5th, 6th, round compensatory pick. He's not going to make or break your season, right? He's not going to be the difference in you making the Super Bowl or not.
No. And again, why would you want to spend that kind of money on a down roster wide receiver when there are tons and tons of wide receivers coming into the league every single year? You can get them on cheap deals and get them to produce early. So I think wide receiver is a position that is headed towards the way of running back, where there's just a ton of these guys. There's a ton of these guys coming into the league. There are some top-end guys who I think the difference between running back and wide receiver is that there are some top-end guys in the league that make more of an exponential difference than probably the top-end running backs do as far as, But I think for the vast majority of the wide receivers, there isn't. I think for the vast majority of the wide receivers, they are all fairly replaceable simply because there are so many of them. The talent level coming out of college has increased exponentially since passing camps that started happening in high schools. These kids are coming into the league having run routes since they were 15, 16 years old.
I don't disagree with you that you could find like wide receiver 3s and wide receiver 4s easier now than ever before. I don't necessarily think you can find wide receiver 1s and even wide receiver 2s. I think you can find, but like the legit number 1 guy that can consistently win against one-on-one coverage, those guys are still hard to find.
I think it depends on what you're trying to do. I mean, like, and also whether you need that kind of player is really based a lot on what your offense is. I mean, frankly, like the Cowboys had 2 of those number 1 type receivers last season, and they had a hard time finding enough balls for everybody and getting the production level that they wanted, and they spent a lot of money for it. Yeah. So I think that's I think teams are looking at what's happening with Deebo Samuel in San Francisco, and they're seeing that sometimes you don't necessarily need a number 1 wide receiver in order to get the production out of your offense. You need an offensive weapon that you can kind of move around and do a bunch of different stuff, and then you need outside wide receivers. I think that the outside wide receivers, the X's, they can be a little bit more physically difficult to find because there is like such a specific kind of body type you want. But I think the idea that you need to have a top end wide receiver 1 to win it all. I mean, I think that's what happened with the Rams, but I don't know that that's necessarily always the case for every offense to have success. So I think other teams are trying to find ways to skin that cat in a different way.
Last thing that I want to mention here, Noah Brown, we mentioned him at the top of the show.
Yeah.
It was confirmed that he got the veteran minimum deal, which is fine, right? Actually younger than Cedrick Wilson, set career's highest this year in receptions, receiving yards, yards per reception, yards per target actually went up. I know it's an incredibly small sample size, but
yeah,
I mean, listen, he's a good player. Like, he's a really good wide receiver 5, and if you force him up into a bigger role into wide receiver 4, you're going to be okay. Good special teamer, good blocker. Teammates love him. I'm actually really excited about this move. I didn't want to see him go, and it gives you a really safe wide receiver floor. Like, if you go into the draft with Michael Gallup, CeeDee Lamb, Noah Brown, Sami Fehoko, and I'm going to assume like Malik Turner probably going to be back, at least you have a NFL receiving core, right?
Yeah, I mean that's the issue. I mean, if you look at what the Cowboys currently had on their rosters in terms of wide receivers and tight ends, the cover was essentially bare. Yeah. So I think getting Noah Brown at least gives somebody who's familiar with your offense into that room. Besides CeeDee Lamb,
plus the coaches love him.
And frankly, we still have to have that guy that on the field the moment he catches the football, we aren't 100% sure whether it's CeeDee Lamb or Noah Brown. That moment,
that little
still
split
fun.
Second there,
that split second where you can't tell if that's a 5 or an 8 on his back is always fun too. So I know I like Noah Brown. He's so versatile, and you can use him in so many different ways. It's a great. He's not quite where Cedrick Wilson was last year, but I think he can be that kind of role in a different way and still be incredibly useful.
And I'm actually glad that he's around because I think like Sami Fehoko is somebody that can learn a lot from Noah Brown.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, find a way to make the roster as a blocker and to get on the field on special teams and to get on the field in sub packages, or not even sub packages, but certain offensive packages. I think it's good. So I'm never ever going to complain about signing somebody like Noah Brown to the roster at a vet minimum deal. Yeah, he probably won't even count against the salary cap because of the top 51 cutoff. So
that's true.
Don't need to worry about that at all. All right, one more quick break to tell you guys about Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock up on all the parts that you need. Rock Auto has everything from engine control modules and brake parts, motor oil, and even new carpet. Whether it's for your classic or your daily driver, get everything you need in a few easy clicks delivered directly to your door. Best of all, prices at rockauto.com are always reliably low, and they're the same for professionals and do-it-yourselfers. Why spend up to twice as much for the same parts? Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, locked on in the How Did You Hear About Us box so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com today. All right. The last thing that I wanted to mention to you is a couple mock drafts. So you typically see after the combine, these are when mock drafts are the most accurate because you've got all these scouts, coaches, general managers, decision makers all in one place. They're out late at bars talking. And this is when you see a lot of new information. So I thought it was really, really interesting today that Lance Zierlein of NFL.com, Dane Brugler of The Athletic, and another mock draft I can't remember off the top of my head, all mocked the same player to the Cowboys at pick number 24. And that player is Treylon Burks, the wide receiver from Arkansas. I believe we're going to talk about him soon, like do an in-depth scouting report. But when you first hear that name mentioned with the Cowboys, what do you think?
I think of Des Bryant. I haven't watched a ton of Burks yet. I mean, that's kind of been my assignment tonight, actually. But I have seen a little bit, and I know that he was one of the few wide receivers who had a disappointing testing day. On Tuesday or Wednesday or whatever it was.
We haven't got to talk about the combine yet because there's so much news.
We will. We promise. There's just a lot. I just think I like the idea because what I feel like the Cowboys need to do is kind of better mix and match the type of wide receivers they have. And it kind of, again, makes me wonder if that's part of their thought process with the Amari situation, is that now they want to kind of, and not speaking to any of the other stuff, just speaking schematically, if they want to like kind of move towards a more versatile wide receiver core. I think the issue, and we've talked about this even when CeeDee Lamb got drafted, is that Amari and CeeDee are very kind of similar players in some ways. I think Amari is more of a route runner, and I think CeeDee is a slightly more of a yak guy. I mean, after the catch. But I think that, what this allows the Cowboys to do is kind of look for a different type of wide receiver, or at least someone that maybe you can kind of complement with CeeDee Lamb a little bit more. And I think that someone like Burks would be interesting because, he kind of he's also very much kind of a yak guy in that sense.
Yeah,
I do think that he's a little bit more of a kind of, like more of the yak guy in the sense of Deebo Samuel, right? Where you can get the ball with him in short situations and he can make big plays out of it. I think with CeeDee, you're getting the ball to him a little bit further down the field than letting him just run through safeties and that sort of thing. I think that, even though Cooper is maybe the best slant route runner in the entire NFL, I think that this is a guy that Burke is a guy that if you can get the ball on a slant, I mean, it's not going to be as easy as it is with Cooper, but he's going to do more with it after the catch, right? Like, sure. I mean, Cooper, despite being a very big receiver, wasn't always, an elite after the catch guy. I think that Burke, eventually could be a little bit better than him in that specific area in the NFL eventually. Now you lose something obviously with Amari is an incredible route runner. You're not necessarily getting that in Burke immediately. But he is, in the sense that, Des Bryant was kind of this athletic, explosive, very physical, very hard to bring down sort of wide receiver that you kind of just want to get the ball to and see what happens. I think that's kind of why my first thought goes to Des Bryant when I talk about Burks.
Yeah, so we're going to do a deep dive on some first-round receivers that the Cowboys could be interested in. We're going to talk about, just spoiling the show, Chris Olave, Jamison Williams from Alabama. And then I know we talked about maybe doing Jahan Dotson from Penn State, but I think we should add Treylon Burks in there, right? Because of this news. But I don't disagree with you. Like, we talked about this all offseason so far. Like, the Cowboys need to find an easy button on offense, right? If they need 7 yards, you don't necessarily need to have Amari Cooper having to win a one-on-one matchup. But if you can throw a screen out to somebody like Treylon Burks or give him the ball in the backfield and get yards that way, that would help. My biggest issue, though, with this, Landon, is if you draft someone like Treylon Burks, is your offense going to be a little too slow? Like, I know he's really dynamic after the catch, but you've got CeeDee Lamb, who's a 4-5 guy. Burks, who is 4.55, Michael Gallup, who's a 4.52 before the ACL injury. You just signed Noah Brown, who's like a 4.6 receiver. Is this offense going to be too slow? Listen, I'm going to spoil the show a little bit, but I have Burks as my number one receiver in this class. I'm just not sure he's the best fit with the Cowboys. I feel like they need somebody who is a little bit more explosive and a little bit quicker that can win with route running, and I'm just not sure that it's Burks.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, I mean, it kind of what we were just talking about with Burks. I think the idea is that he can do some things that maybe you want in your offense. He kind of just does it in a different way. I do think the Cowboys would benefit more if they could find a way to get Williams on this team, or someone that has burner speed and is a yak threat that way, right? You get him the ball and he just run around everybody
while he's already moving, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think, and honestly, going back to Cooper again, like Cooper was another guy who could easily get downfield and make plays without a doubt, but he wasn't a burner necessarily.
No.
He wasn't someone who was like just running past cornerbacks like that. I mean, he makes his move, makes you fall down, and then he runs past you. So I think that the Cowboys could use that kind of talent on the field, simply also because you can give them jet sweeps, you can just do a lot of stuff and kind of mix in that type of player, and then potentially play them in the slot, get them a free release, stretch the field vertically, and give Lamb and Schultz and whoever else room to operate underneath. And I think that has been part of the issue with the Cowboys passing game at times, is there's in situations where they're playing man coverage, the Cowboys were able to kind of find ways to get open with some of their players. But in situations where they were playing zone and playing with a shell over the top, it was tough to push those safeties back to give the rest of the wide receivers room to operate, because they just didn't have the speed to test teams deep.
Who was the last receiver that they've had that's really scared teams vertically? Like, that's just going to run past them.
I mean, I feel like Gallup was sort of like that, but he didn't have like that kind of speed, right? So, yeah, I mean, Gallup has been the closest thing this team's had. Like, Gallup has been the guy that they have actually used as the kind of vertical field stretcher, but it's only ever effective when he's able to complete those passes down the field. Yeah. It's not like he's enough of a threat to, like,
he's not going to run by you and there's going to be 15 yards of separation, right? Like,
exactly. He's a very good contested catch player, but what the Cowboys need in their deep game is someone who's a yard or two past the cornerback when the ball gets thrown. I think that's what this offense has been missing a little bit of.
They need a Rocket Ishmael, right?
Yeah, something like that. Let's see if we can trade 2 firsts for it.
Yeah, Joey Galloway.
yeah. Let's. What do we got? We got a first round. We can trade 2 first rounds for that kind of guy.
I think they need somebody that has the shoot speed, right? To try to censor.
I mean, there's a reason. I mean, look, who has had a more interesting free agent or just transactional career than Brandon Cooks, right?
Oh my gosh,
there's a reason, right? There's a reason he keeps getting traded for first round picks, right? Because he's got a level of speed that's just hard to teach. He can get behind defenses. It just happens all the time. And even if he's not producing at a crazy high rate, those players are incredibly valuable simply because of all the cushion that they provide for the rest of your offense.
I mean, and look at Deshaun Jackson, even over the last 5 years, right? He can't stay healthy at all, but teams keep paying him and trying to play him because the league is so desperately in need of guys like that. So it'll be interesting to see if the Cowboys are searching for more kind of team speed at wide receiver this offseason. All right, that is it for today's show. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow to preview some first-round receivers, and we'll talk about their fits with the Cowboys, how they would fit in with CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott and all that kind of stuff. So listen to podcasts wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. You can follow the show on YouTube. Check us out on Twitter at Locked On Cowboys. You can follow Landon at McCool BCB, and I'm at Marcus _Mosher, and we'll see you guys next time.